Hello friends, my name is Sarah and welcome to Stacks and Scones. It is officially September, hooray! A brand new month means it's time for a reading wrap up, and today we're going to talk about the 10 books that I read in the month of August. First up, The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing by Mira Jacob. The story follows an Indian immigrant family who comes to the United States in the 1970s and settles in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The main character is the daughter of the family, Amina Apin, who is a 30-year-old photographer living in Seattle, Washington. She gets a phone call from her mom one day because her dad has been talking to relatives who have been dead for over 20 years, and her mom is a little bit concerned. So Amina flies home to Albuquerque to try to talk to her dad and figure out what's going on, and in the process learns a whole lot about her family's history and has to grapple with decisions that were made by her and her parents in the years past. I gave this book 3.5 out of 5 stars because I thought the premise was really interesting and I did really enjoy the plot and the uniqueness of it. I thought the description was really excellent of both the characters and the different locations that the book takes place in. I thought her descriptions of India in particular were very evocative of what I have always imagined the country to be like, having heard first-person accounts from a lot of my friends who've been there. The major thing I didn't enjoy about this book was the non-linear style that it's written in. The author sort of hops around from present day to past, and you get different snippets of the story as you're going along, and while I think that can be done really well in some books, in this book it felt a little bit choppy to me. It almost felt a little bit like, you know, novellas or mini stories that were strung together. And while in general I did enjoy the arc of the story, I thought the transition and flow between the different time periods could have been done a little better. That being said, I did really enjoy it. I thought the characters were engaging. I thought the plot was very unique. So if you're interested in a really interesting story and you don't mind the nonlinear fashion of writing, then I highly recommend you check this one out. Number 2. Hadassah, One Night with the King by Thomas Tenney. I've been on a mission to finish reading all of the books that I have on my shelf as much as possible before buying new ones, and this is one of the ones that I had and I hadn't read yet, so I decided to give it a shot. The general premise is that there is a girl in modern times who is about to get married, and this letter that Hadassah or Queen Esther wrote to another woman who was sort of in the king's court and potentially going to become queen has been passed down from generation to generation to generation in her family. And so about a week before she gets married, her father takes her to this, you know, super secret place in a synagogue in Israel and gives her this letter to read. Because it's written in first-person perspective, you get a lot of what Hadassah is thinking and feeling, and it felt incredibly repetitive at times. When I was reading it, I didn't really think I was going to rate it very high, but the end of it ended up being really action-packed and really good. And I mean, I knew it was going to be action-packed because I know the story of Esther and I know what happens, but I did think he did a really excellent job of sort of bringing the intrigue and things like that into play near the end of the book. It's a quick read. If you really like the story of Esther, you might find this really interesting, and if you don't mind a lot of thoughts and feelings that are repeated all of the time, then you might enjoy it as well. Up next, Divergent, Insurgent, and Allegiant by Veronica Roth. Obviously I started with Divergent and I finished with Allegiant and I read Insurgent in the middle, but I read this entire series in less than 48 hours. Individually, I gave Divergent 4 stars, and I gave Insurgent and Allegiant 3.5 stars each. One thing that Veronica Roth definitely has going for her, especially in these 2 books, Divergent and Insurgent, is her pacing. Divergent was definitely my favorite of the 3. I think the book series started out pretty strong with this one, but sort of peters off. Insurgent sort of suffers from middle book syndrome, and by the time you get to book 3, there's just a lot of questions that she answers, that she answered probably later than she should have, but also the answers to those questions give you more questions, and she doesn't really answer those questions. And so I felt like there were a lot of holes in the world that she built. That was my biggest issue with the story, because there were a lot of moments where even though I did really care about the characters and I did want to know what was going to happen to them, I still just didn't know a lot of things about how the world worked. And for a dystopian novel like this, that's really important. I did really enjoy the philosophical questions and the themes that she poses and explores throughout the series. I loved the relationship between Tris and Four. I especially loved a lot of the things that they grapple with in their relationship in the 3rd book. Even though of the series, the 3rd book was my least favorite, I think their relationship was my favorite part of the third book as a whole. I definitely want to do some sort of video talking about these books a bit more in depth because I had a lot of feelings about the ending of the book, and it took me a couple of days to sort of work through those feelings because there was just a lot of them. I would love to know if you guys want me to do reviews individually on each of the 3 books, or if you would like me to do sort of a series recap and talk about all 3 books as a whole. I'm gonna stop trying to hold all of these up again. Up next, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is actually my second attempt at reading Wuthering Heights. I tried it at the end of 2013 to the beginning of 2014, and I got about 90 pages into the story before I was like, nope, this is too depressing. I'm not gonna finish reading this. So I put it down and decided I would come back to it eventually, and that eventually came in August of this year. The thing that I really enjoyed about this story was the actual writing itself. Emily Bronte has an incredible mastery of the English language. Her turns of phrase, her descriptions, her character development, all of those things are excellent and beautiful and wonderful and everything that I love about classic literature in general. However, the story is depressing as all get out. I honestly don't understand how people can read the story and view it as like a romantic passion, kind of situation, because the truth is 90% of the things that happen in the story only happen because Heathcliff is so bent on revenge against Catherine for marrying someone else and against her brother for abusing him and being a jerk when he was growing up, that like all of these other people wind up with completely miserable lives. That's not romantic passionate love. That's like stalker obsession kind of love, which we don't want at all. I'll be honest, I didn't like the story at all. I gave it 2 stars because I liked the writing a lot, but yeah, just was not a fan of the story. I really don't know why people like it. Up next, The Nanny Diaries by Emma McLaughlin and Nicole Krauss. This is another one of those books where I'm not really sure when I got a copy of it or how it wound up on my shelf, but it did, and since I'm trying to read all of the books that are on my shelf, I decided to read this. I didn't really enjoy the book. It started out fine enough, light, pithy, just kind of funny and quirky, and as the story progressed, it just felt super, super tropey to me. The book is about being a nanny in New York City, and it's so much about just like generically being a nanny in New York City that the main character's name is Nanny, and the family that she works for are the X's, so it's just Mrs. X and Mr. X. You never learn what their actual names are. The kid that she nannies for has a name, and even her boyfriend doesn't actually get a name. He's from Harvard, and so she first calls him a Harvard hottie before she knows what his name is, and so then he's just called HH for the entire rest of the book. I understand probably that the general thought process was like, we're gonna give these main characters these really generic names because the whole point is that this is a story that could happen to any nanny in any family in New York City, but it just came across as being really cliche and really tropey, and I just was not a fan. Just give the characters names. It's not that hard. Everyone else gets them. Why can't the main character get a name? I wound up giving it 1 out of 5 stars for tropiness and cliche, expectedness, and a lot of F-bombs. Do not recommend. Up next, Passion and Purity by Elizabeth Elliot. This is the only nonfiction book I wound up reading this month, mostly because I read nonfiction books slower than I read fiction books. This book was written by Elizabeth Elliot, who is the wife of the Christian martyr Jim Elliot. Passion and Purity talks about relationships, dating and marriage relationships in the context of the Bible and using the story of Elizabeth and Jim's relationship from when they met until they got married. I really loved this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I've read a lot of relationship and dating books over the years, and this is without a doubt probably one of my favorites. I read it for the first time in middle school, and I was not at all mature enough to appreciate the message that Elizabeth tries to get across. I highly, highly recommend this book. She will convict you and make you think about a lot of things, but I think they're really good things to consider whether you are dating, engaged, married, or just happily chilling as a single person. Up next, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is my first read of the series in over a decade. There was a lot I didn't remember about it, so in many respects it was sort of like reading it again for the very first time. I pretty much remembered that Bilbo went on an adventure and that he did a bunch of riddles with Gollum, you know, in the pool or whatever to get the ring, and that was pretty much all that I remembered from this entire book. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Bilbo is a lot of fun, and even though there are a ton of dwarves that he hangs out with through the whole story, I think Tolkien does a really excellent job of giving the ones that play prominent roles really unique personalities, and which can be really hard when you have that big of a cast of characters and they're all introduced basically at the same time. I love this series. I love The Lord of the Rings and Bilbo and the Hobbits and dwarves and Middle-earth and all of those things. So just suffice to say, I think everyone should read these because there's really no other series like this that has been written, and it's just excellent. And if you're gonna read the trilogy, you may as well read the prequel. Finally, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars because it's just wonderful. It really is. I love Tom Bombadil. I just think he's fabulous and wonderful, and I'm really sad that they cut him out of the movie because he's just excellent. Sam Gamgee is fantastic, and I love Aragorn, and I love this book. And you know, if you're not familiar with the story, then you've been living under a rock for a long time. But just suffice it to say, this is a wonderful story, and I love it. And I gave it 5 stars because it's delightful. You will fall in love. You really will. At least I hope you will. And if you don't, then I'm sorry. So there you have it, friends. That's what I read in August. I hope you enjoyed hearing all of my thoughts on these different stories. Please let me know in the comments if you've read any of them. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on them as well. Also, please let me know some of the books that you read in August and if you think I should pick any of them up in September or the months to come. If you want to follow me elsewhere online, you can find me on Twitter at Sarah Ann Hayes, on Instagram at Sarah Ann Hayes, and my writing is at sarahannhayes.com. If you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe, give it a big old thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Read it right after I read whatever they call it, the Council of the Thing. It's not the Council of the Ring because they don't really know that's what's happening, but like the council where all the people meet, whatever that's called. So there you have it, friends. This is what I read in August. Books down.